Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, I am going to share with you my personal tips on surviving the first trimester, and I'm specifically going to be focusing on my experience with prenatal screening and the kind of stress that I had to go through during that time period. If this is your first time here, my name is Nancy DaCosta. Welcome to my channel, Mommy Notes. On this channel, I share with you my journey into motherhood. If you haven't met me before, I'm 35 years old. I'm expecting my first child in January. It's a boy, and I'm currently 22 weeks pregnant. This is also my first time pregnancy. I'm sharing everything that I'm learning and doing. So if you like that kind of thing, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button below. I plan to publish more videos just like this one of the things that I'm learning during pregnancy and motherhood. So prenatal screening, it can be a little bit stressful. So with me, what happened was that I went in for my very first prenatal appointment when I was 9 weeks pregnant back in June. Very reassuring visit. The baby had a solid heartbeat, and because of my age, my midwife recommended a prenatal screening test called Panorama. And before I go any further, let me just say, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not telling you not to do prenatal screenings or to do prenatal screenings. I'm not giving advice of any kind. I am simply just sharing my experience, my personal experience, so that you don't feel as alone as I did during this time. So I had my 9-week appointment, and the baby had a solid heartbeat and was growing in the right place. Two very reassuring things to hear. So the test that was recommended to me, called Panorama, is what's known as non-invasive prenatal testing, which means they take blood from your arm, your own blood. It doesn't invade the uterus, it doesn't invade the baby, and they test the mother's blood and they separate the fetal blood from the baby, and theoretically they can screen for a number of chromosomal abnormalities as early as 10 weeks and 1 day with these prenatal screening tests. I was also told that because of my age, I'm over 35, that these prenatal screening tests are generally covered by insurance. Again, if you decide to do prenatal screening tests, just check with your insurance, give them a call, make sure that they cover it, or at least there's a very small copay and you're not out several $100s or even more. So these prenatal screening tests also can theoretically tell you the sex of your baby as early as 10 weeks. Generally speaking, during a normal pregnancy, you don't normally find out the sex of the baby until either you have a diagnostic test, if you so choose to, or if you have your 20-week ultrasound, which is usually around the 20-week mark. That way they do the whole fetal anatomy scan and they can find and see a number of things. So because I'm considered advanced maternal age, and because my midwife recommended it, I decided to go for this prenatal screening test. So I took the test when I was 10 weeks and 5 days along, and I waited 2 long weeks for my results. And these were very stressful weeks. And what I'm trying to say here is that the first trimester is really, really tough. And for me personally, what made it so hard was the fact that I hadn't really told anyone yet that I was pregnant. Me and my husband had decided to keep it to ourselves until we had more information to start sharing it openly. And I was really looking forward to starting to tell people once I was out of my first trimester. So I was really anxious to get my prenatal screening results. So when I got my test results, my midwife called me to tell me that my results actually came back abnormal and high risk due to low fetal fraction in my blood. And basically how these tests work is that they look at the fetal fraction, or the amount of fetal DNA in the mother's blood. And according to them, if the mother's blood has low fetal DNA, that means there might be something wrong with the fetus. There might be something wrong with the baby. And I was told that I had a 1 in 17 chance of having a baby with triploidy, trisomy 18, or trisomy 13. And if you don't know what those are, don't worry about it. They are these obscure chromosomal abnormalities that I had never even heard of before, and truthfully, they're not actually conducive to life. I think the most well-known chromosomal abnormality is Down syndrome, but nevertheless, there's a number of chromosomal things that could happen, and usually with most chromosomal abnormalities, usually what happens is that a woman has a miscarriage because because the body just says, you know what, this isn't gonna work. Because nature says, you know what, this really isn't gonna work. So by this point, I was about 12 weeks pregnant, and I had been keeping this little secret to myself for about 2 months by now. And I wanted to start telling people. I particularly wanted to tell my closest friend in the whole world who just had a baby herself about 2 weeks prior. Because of my abnormal prenatal screening results, I was referred to maternal fetal medicine for genetic counseling and to do 3D ultrasounds so they could see better what was going on internally, and if advisable, possibly speak about doing diagnostic tests like chorionic villus sampling or an amniocentesis. And when I got that call, truthfully, I was devastated. I had never ever gotten any kind of abnormal screening test result in my entire life. And I was also fed up with keeping this secret to myself. I didn't want to wait any longer to tell, more specifically my closest friend, to start talking about what I was going through. At this point, the silence was starting to drive me insane. Anyway, I did manage to get an appointment with maternal fetal medicine a couple of days later. But at this point, this was a few days after the 4th of July, I was at a breaking point. I talked to my husband about what we were going through, and I basically said to him that I was ready to tell my closest friend, the one who just had a baby, because quite frankly, it was driving me crazy. And to be completely frank, even if the worst thing that could have occurred was gonna happen, I still would probably tell her everything about it anyway. And I should also mention that this one particular friend also happens to be in the same age group as me. So I messaged her that day asking her, can she speak on FaceTime? She was home with her newborn baby girl, and I was dying to talk to her about this. So I got on FaceTime with her, and I basically said, well, I happen to be 12 weeks pregnant right now. And she told me she wasn't surprised because of all the questions that I was asking. I was showing a real interest in her pregnancy later on, and she wasn't surprised to hear that I was pregnant and going through some of the stuff. And I asked her point blank, did she do any prenatal screening tests? Did she have this anxiety? Because she didn't actually share with me that she was pregnant until she was about 4 months along. And at this point, I was about 3 months along. So I asked her, did you go through any of this crap? Did you go through all this stress? And to put it bluntly, she had gone through all these different things. And to answer my question, she had gone through pretty much the same stuff as me. She actually told me that she did a different prenatal screening test with a different company. She had an amniocentesis done. There was a lot of waiting. There was a lot of testing. There was a lot of all of that. Which brings me to my next point, which is that people don't generally talk about this unless you ask. And that's why it can be so lonely, because you're going through all these different emotions. You don't know if the emotions that you're experiencing are normal. In our culture, basically you can tell people you're pregnant anytime you want. It's up to you. But generally speaking, most people wait until after they're out of the first trimester, which is the riskiest part of a pregnancy. But that time period can drive any person who's keeping this to themselves absolutely crazy. So her very quick, very brief advice as a new mom with a healthy baby girl was to take the prenatal screening test results with a grain of salt. And that was before I went to maternal fetal medicine. So I went to maternal fetal medicine the next day after I told my friend that we were having a baby, and I was about 12 weeks along. They did some ultrasounds. Everything looked pretty normal at that point. Based on the ultrasound results, they couldn't see anything unusual. Everything looked perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, which was all really good. And speaking to the doctor that I saw there, apparently it's very common for people to get these false positive test results and then get referred to maternal fetal medicine when there's really nothing wrong with the fetus and there's nothing wrong with the baby. Like I said, this is not medical advice. I'm not saying they're unnecessary. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying for me personally, it caused me a lot of stress. And it's a test that should have been more reassuring. But I think what happened was they say that 10 weeks is the earliest you can start testing. Maybe they just need to start testing people a little bit later. But anyhow, for me personally, the prenatal screening tests were not very useful. But in either case, that visit was more reassuring. I've had 2 other ultrasounds since then. I've gone for a 16-week ultrasound, I've gone for a 20-week ultrasound, and everything looks completely healthy. And it seems like that prenatal screening test was just a fluke. So anyhow, the reason why I tell you this story is so that you don't feel alone if you're going through this, because I think a lot of women go through an experience like this and they don't really tell anybody, or they don't really talk about it. And actually it could be really hard. For me personally, my first trimester, I didn't have really bad nausea. It was very mild. I wasn't super tired. I was definitely more tired than normal, but I wasn't super tired. But I think the worst and hardest part about the first trimester was the suffering in silence, like I opened in this video. So what I would do differently now, knowing what I know now, is I wish I had told my one friend sooner. I wish I had told her I was pregnant almost as soon as I found out about it, so that I could ask her more questions and just be openly sharing and having somebody to confide in, because that was actually the part that was driving me the most crazy. And my advice to you, if you choose to do any kind of prenatal screening or non-invasive prenatal testing, is to take those test results with a grain of salt. Whatever you do not make any irreversible decisions because of a weird or abnormal prenatal screening test result. That could be a huge mistake. Anyhow, I'm happy to say now that I'm now 22 weeks pregnant with a baby boy, a very healthy, perfect looking baby boy as far as ultrasounds can tell you. And even when I went for my last ultrasound about a week and a half ago, I was told, we don't think you need any more ultrasounds. So if you're going through something like this, if this is your first time pregnancy, or you've been pregnant before and you're going through these motions, I hope that this is comforting to you. Like I said, I wish I had told some people sooner, particularly my close friend who just had a baby herself. I wish I'd confided in her sooner, because maybe I wouldn't have gone so crazy during this time period. Anyhow, if you're going through this, just know you're not alone. There's plenty of women going through similar things like you. And I hope that by sharing my experience with prenatal screening and suffering in silence, that you don't have to go through the same kind of stress and anxiety that I did. That's all for now. I'm looking forward to sharing more of what I'm learning during this pregnancy of mine. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button below with the little bell and subscribe to my channel. I plan to publish more videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. And this is my belly at 22 weeks. Just barely popping.